The Xerian void had earned its name through millennia of whispered legends in the High Council, a yawning expanse between star systems, where even the most advanced navigational rays struggled to maintain a lock on the cosmos. 2. Sailors of the Korgoth Armada. It was both a crucible and a proving ground. Only the most disciplined crews could thread its gravitational eddies without veering hopelessly off course. Now, under the cold gaze of distant quasars, Admiral Routhen's flagship Icthaerum carved a path toward the Terran sector, its engines a pure, humming note against the silent backdrop of space. Routhen stood at the prow of the command platform, robes of violet and silver swirling around his slender frame. In the half-light of the strategically dimmed bridge, every line on his face was etched deep by the long years of war, the tremor in his left hand, the slight narrowing of his golden eyes. He had led his people through uncounted skirmishes, some against primitive frontier raiders, others against civilizations whose fleets outnumbered theirs 3-1, and each time emerged victorious. Yet as the Icthaerum approached the coordinates designated as meeting point Delta, he felt a tremor in his own confidence. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Shirey from the sensor console, her voice betraying the slightest edge of excitement. Shirey was young by Xerian standards, 30 arc cycles old, barely half Routhen's age, but in her pale, narrow face and luminous green eyes lay a fervor that reminded him of his own early days. In the fleet, long-range scanners are picking up a hyperspatial signature. It's unusual. At her words, the bridge fell quiet. Tactical officers paused their drills, and every communications channel stilled, as though the Icthaerum itself leaned forward to listen. "Describe," Routhen ordered, his tone measured. Shirey's fingers danced across the holokeys. "It's a single vessel, Admiral Dreadnought class by mass and energy output, but its signature is unstable. The energy waves are fluctuating, almost like a heartbeat, and there's a cloaking pulse echo riding atop its warp trail." The Admiral frowned. Cloaking technology, once the exclusive domain of clandestine reconnaissance ships, was now standard in every Terran dreadnought. Xerians had mastered stealth fields decades prior, but no enemy vessel had ever dared to employ such measures on a ship of that size. "Ready the forward scanners," he said. "Project the hull schematic." Moments later, the main viewport burst into shimmering resolution. Before them hovered a silhouette, vast, angular, and dark as void itself, its prow curved outward in a jutting crescent, while two massive engine nacelles bristled from its flanks. The dreadnought's hull appeared to ripple adaptive stealth plating, shimmering like liquid mercury under starlight, as if alive. The sheer scale of it dwarfed even the Icthaerum. If their data was correct, this human vessel carried more mass and firepower than any single ship in the Korgoth Armada. A collective breath seemed to catch in the cockpit. Even the gravitic stabilizers hummed lower. As though in deference, Lieutenant Chirrell, the chief of tactical operations, broke the silence with a soft exhalation. "By the ancestors, what is that thing capable of?" Routhen's gaze narrowed. He had expected an enemy fleet, thousands of vessels arrayed in tight formation, weapons primed for extermination. What he saw instead was a lone, gargantuan warship gliding toward them. It operated under its own accord, drawing inexorably closer, indifferent to the command's warnings or the tactical doctrine that forbade enemy proximity. "Without orders, status of offensive batteries?" Routhen asked, his voice as cool as forged ice. "All turrets primed, Admiral." The tactical officer replied, "Ion cannons at full voltage, plasma turrets at standby. We have sufficient ordnance to obliterate a planet." Across the bridge, the engineer lieutenant, Yalin, monitored the power grid. "Main thrusters warming to combat readiness," she reported. "But I'm picking up a faint oscillation from their warp coils like a subspace resonance. We've never encountered a hull signature like this." The Admiral nodded. "Very well, hold fire until I give the command." He turned to Shirey. "Keep scanning. Record every fluctuation, every harmonic. I want a complete dossier." Shirey tapped her console. Rouse furrowed in concentration. "Understood, Admiral." For several minutes, nothing happened. The dreadnought drifted closer, and the Icthaerim's fleet mirrored every movement in perfect lockstep. Cruisers on the left, frigates forming a crescent to the right, distant destroyers arrayed behind. The only sound was the low, insistent thrum of the flagship's fusion reactors. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the entire fleet seemed to hesitate. Ion thrusters flickered as though rethinking their vector. Turrets rotated halfway and froze. Communications channels went dead. The hum of gravitic stabilizers quivered, then stilled entirely. On the bridge of the Ichtharum, all systems blinked to idle. Instruments registered normal power flows, but no commands would execute. Weapons were locked in standby, engines in silent drift. Admiral Routhen reached forward, his gauntleted hand brushing the transparent viewport. He felt a faint vibration, an echo of power that wasn't theirs. "Report," he demanded, though his voice sounded muffled in the sudden stillness. Lieutenant Shirey's face had gone pale. "All ships, they've shut down. Not from external damage. Internal controls are locked. We can't override." It's as though their commanders have simply, willfully paused. Routhen closed his eyes briefly. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, every captain in the Armada, poised to launch the annihilation of humanity, now bound by an unseen tether. He inhaled slowly, steeling himself. There were two possibilities. A subspace weapon had struck them, or something deeper. Something worse. "Emergency Protocol Delta," he ordered after a moment. "Activate backup neural nets. Bypass main conduits. Override all command locks." Shirey shook her head, whispering, "It's not responding, Admiral. We're locked out at a quantum level." A cold fury surged through him. He rose, robes brushing the polished deck. "Begin data dump to secure memory banks. We will analyze later. For now, gather every tactical log, every hull resonance sample. They cannot hide beyond the cloak forever." Outside, the human dreadnought continued its silent approach. No weapons flared, no calm signal reached out. It glided like a specter, deliberately, as though to survey the incapacitated armada it had humbled. Its hull plating winked in the starlight, shifting patterns of darkness and light in endless cascade. Admiral Routhen straightened. His voice, when it came, was low and cold. "Remain calm. We are Zirian's hour will bend steel and spores alike. We will break this freeze." His golden eyes swept the bridge. "Tactical teams, ready boarding shuttles. If their captain dares set foot on our ships, we'll greet them with every blade in the Armada." The dreadnought's prow passed, within sensor range, close enough to illuminate every ridge and seam of its hull. And then, in a motion too subtle for any but the most perceptive instruments, the human vessel's adaptive field shimmered, expanding outward in concentric ripples that lapped at the edges of Zirian scanners. For the first time in his life, Admiral Routhen felt an inkling of doubt. He glanced at his crew, resilient, faithful, drilled to perfection, and wondered if their superiority, their centuries of conquest, had blinded them to a new frontier of warfare. As the dreadnought drifted onward, he realized they had not truly seen humanity until this moment. A lone ship, whose mere presence bent the will of an entire armada. And so, in the hushed stillness of the Zirian void, the stage was set. A single, human warship against the might of an alien armada. And not a single pulse of energy exchanged yet. The true clash had already begun. Captain Emira Andover stood alone on the observation deck of the Resolute, her eyes tracing the distant outline of the immobilized Zirian armada. Below her, the dreadnought's massive bulk pulsed with restrained power, its gravitic hull shimmering faintly as it bore the weight of Dr. Rhea Malik's secret modification. For weeks, Andover had pored over tactical simulations and sensor data, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of an enemy. Fleet brought to a standstill by her own ships. Silent aura, she exhaled slowly, pushing aside the tidal wave of adrenaline that still thrummed through her veins. The Resolute had slipped through the void's hyperspace corridor at impossible velocity, slingshotting back into real space mere megaseconds ahead of the targeted Zirian vanguard. Then, Malik's field had woven around her hull like a ghostly curtain, suffusing every subsystem with a subspace resonance that pried open the enemy's command sapses. And now, for the first time in Tierney command history, humanity held the upper hand against the ancient scourge of Xeris. A soft chime, echoed through the observation deck, and Andover turned to see Commander Luis Garcia entering, datapad in hand. His uniform bore signs of long deployment, faint scorch marks from plasma drills, a slight wrinkle where he'd fallen asleep at his station. He was her second in command and, more important, her oldest friend in the fleet. "The Marines are prepped and waiting," he reported quietly. "Boarding pods are on standby. Tactical feed is green, and they've finished calibrating the Graviton Lance charges. Colonel Chen says they can breach any flagship hull in under 6 minutes." Andover nodded, her gaze drifting back to the frozen warships arrayed before them. "Good, but we don't want to slaughter them indiscriminately. Malik's field only holds for 90 seconds from full deployment." She tapped her comm badge. "Dr. Malik to bridge." Moments later, the xenophysicist's holographic form shimmered into view beside Andover. Malik's eyes were bright with excitement, though tired shadows lingered at the corners. Her hair, once raven black, was shot through with streaks of silver, testament to the long nights spent tinkering with sublayer code and quantum harmonics. "It's stabilized," Malik confirmed, her voice crisp with professional pride. "I've managed to lock the field at 95% coverage. But I must stress, once the Xerians reboot their neural protocols, every ship will come back online in unison. You'll have roughly a minute and a half to complete your objective." Andover squared her shoulders. "Understood. Let's make every second count." Breach and bore down in the hangar bays. 50 boarding pods released from the Resolute's belly like metallic swans taking flight. Each pod was armed with magnetic grapples and high-yield thrusters, calibrated to impact at precisely the hull plating's resonant frequency. As they streaked forward, the Xerian dreadnought's dark form loomed ever larger, silent and unthreatening. Lieutenant Commander Farron Kerr gripped the handrails inside her pod, exoskeletal harness humming, as she adjusted her Marine platoon's trajectory. "All teams, lock formation." She called over the comm. "Stay sharp, field may not affect internal AI defense drones. Expect automated turrets to remain active." The pod's front hatch opened with a hiss, and harpoons shot outward, embedding themselves into the Xerian hull. Within seconds, Farah's team rappelled into the breach corridor lamps, casting long shadows on smooth, obsidian-like surfaces. The airlock cycled and walls slid open as they advanced into the heart of the enemy flagship. Simultaneously on the Resolute's bridge, Captain Andover monitored the live feed. Each squad's helmet cam flickered to life, displaying armored forms moving through dimly lit corridors. She coordinated their movements, directing them to blaze cutting torches through sealed compartments, to detain command staff alive, and to secure critical nodes round the central reactor. Below decks, alarms began to whir faintly within the Xerian ship's purely backup signals running on isolated loops, unaffected by the quantum bind. Red lights flashed, illuminating narrow maintenance shafts. A lone Xerian technician, clad in utilitarian battle armor, reached for a comm panel, but the feed showed his hand stopping mid-air, his eyes widening in mute confusion. Before he collapsed to his knees, "Crossed wires Pod 6 is engaging defense. Drones at Corridor Epsilon 7, reported Lieutenant Marcus Zhao, standing at Andover's side. "They're deploying kinetic interceptors, but the field is jamming their target acquisition. The drones are oscillating between friend and foe protocols." Andover glanced at the tactical display, where tiny icons danced erratically. "Good. Keep an eye on it. Marshal the interdiction drones if they become a threat." Zhao's features softened. "I thought you didn't like automated units." Andover gave him a sit-along look. "I don't, but right now anything that can slow them down helps." She tapped her comm badge. "Chen, status, ACOM." Clipped voice responded. "Plasma lock onto the primary power conduit is complete. We're ready to detonate. Just give the order." Time felt elastic. On one hand, they moved with practiced precision. On the other, each second stretched into an hour of tension. Andover closed her eyes, picturing the worst-case scenario. The Xerian fleet rebooting mid-breach, railguns and torpedoes spearing through the pods. Her Marines pinned and left to rot in the corridors of an alien ship. "Not yet," she said finally. "Hold on my mark." Then, thousands of kilometers away, on the bridge of the immobilized Xerian flagship Vashner, Lieutenant Shiri's sensors flickered back to life. The quantum lock had begun to decay. She spun in her chair, calling, "Admiral Routhen, the field, its frequency is falling." Routhen rose from the central daze, robes brushing the deck. Every captain's hololink flared on, and indistinct Vulgarian curses rushed through the channel. "All ships, prepare for emergency reboot. Isolate main processors and cycle auxiliary neural nets." On the Resolute, Andover's eyes snapped. "Open, they're coming back online. Initiate Phase 2. Roger that," Marcus answered. Thumbs dancing over the console. A low hum rippled through the deck plates as Graviton Lance arrays charged. Focused on structural nodes identified by the boarding teams, Andover's comm crackled. Farah's voice, urgent. "We have 1 minute 30. We're by the command." Nexus 3 hostiles barricading the door. "Breaching charges in 10 seconds, Andover replied. "Stand clear." A pulse of white light erupted through the corridor feed, scattering the Xerian soldiers into stunned shock. Farah's Marines poured in, suppressed weaponry thumping in rhythm, and within 5 more seconds, they'd subdued every defender and secured the niche. Farah swiped a datapad from a fallen Xerian officer and began downloading navigation schematics and weapons protocols. The tides turned at exactly 90 seconds after the initial breach. The Vashiner's systems flared. Gravimetric coils spun back, up, cloaking fields collapsed, and the Dreadnought's turrets realigned toward the point of intrusion. Space shook with the roar of 1,000 engines re-engaging. On the Resolute, a klaxon began its rapid beeping. "They're back," Marcus shouted. "They're targeting our pods with mass driver fire." Captain Andover sprang to her feet. "Chen, sync the detonator, below." Farah slid her finger across the datapad. "Got the reactor grid map detonating in 3, 2, 1 now." A thunderous jolt shook the Vashiner. From the main viewport, the Resolute's crew watched as the Xerian dreadnought rocked, its hull plating buckling under the combined force of internal detonations and external graviton lances. Plasma vents flared in crimson arcs, and a high-pitched wail signaled the breach of the internal coolant system. Yet even as the ship flailed, its turrets pivoted to scorch the departing pods. Explosions lanced through the boarding corridors. On the plasma feed, Farah's team sprinted for their extraction point, wounded Marines in tow. Graviton lance beams leaching through the bulkheads. Andover called out to Garcia, her voice steady but fierce. "Reroute all F shields. Divert surge power to Nachal's prep to outpace their pursuit." The Resolute lurched forward, engines blazing. The xenophysicist's field rippled outward once more, buying just enough time for the pods to clear the vexed wreckage. One by one, they docked against the human ship's hull, evac shuttles disgorged, and graviton lances coughed in the void. The crippled Vashiner gave one final, shuddering breath before its engines cut self-destruct protocols, engaging in a last, desperate gambit to scuttle the ship rather than surrender. A blast-white flare blossomed at its core, collapsing into a superheated cloud that billowed outward like a dying star. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then, across the calm channels of the Resolute, relieved voices erupted in cheers and laughter. Farron Kerr's voice crackled with pride. "All teams confirmed, everyone's aboard, wounded secured. Enemy flagship destroyed." Captain Andover closed her eyes, swallowing the rush of triumph. She opened them again, scanning the stars through the main viewport. In the distance, she could see the crippled wrecks of Xerian destroyers, their bridge lights extinguished, drifting. Like morning paddles behind her, Dr. Malik materialized once more, faintly wavering. "A textbook operation," she said, "but next time, give me 2 minutes. I think we can extend the field's stability by another 15%. Andover allowed herself a rueful smile. "I'll hold you to that, Doc. But for now, report your data. We've earned a moment's respite and, more importantly, a message to send to command." The aftermath of the Vashiner's self-destruct sent shockwaves through the Xerian armada. What had been a tightly woven formation of disciplined warships now drifted apart like shattered gemstones, each hull scarred and many crippled by the combined fury of graviton lances and reactor-scaled charges. But even as the Resolute accelerated into the dark, Captain Andover knew the battle was far from won. The Xerian command synapses might have been fractured, but their fury once reignited, would burn all the fiercer. Point 1. Echoes of defeat in the Ichtherium. Admiral Routhen stood on the bridge's outer catwalk, staring at the smoldering silhouette of what remained of Vashner through the partially reactivated sensor ray. He watched frantic Xerian captains struggle to restore power, their anxious hololinks flickering like dying fireflies. Beside him, Lieutenant Shirey's gaunt face reflected the vessel's eerie glow. "Admiral," she said quietly, "damage reports are coming in. Of the 20 battlecruisers in our vanguard, 6 are beyond immediate repair. Another 8 report hull breaches significant enough to threaten cohesion if we attempt pursuit." Routhen nodded, robes drifting in the weak gravitic field. "We cannot chase them into the void's deeper rifts. Their engines are tempered. For sublight in these sectors, ours would burn out before we caught even one pod." He regarded the unreadable stars ahead. "Yet to leave them unpunished is to invite insurrection among the Alliance." Shirey hesitated. "They've shown us a new tactic, one we lack countermeasures for. If we press on recklessly, we risk more losses." A low growl escaped Routhen's throat, an ancient sound of frustration. "We adapt, Lieutenant. Prepare the repair flotillas to sprint on auxiliary thrusters. I will convene a war council in the Grand Atrium." 2. The human dreadnoughts shadow back aboard the Resolute. Captain Andover reviewed the telemetry feeds as the boarding teams cycled through medical triage. Grimy stretchers lined the infirmary bay, Marines battered by kinetic shards engineered, drones singed by feedback loops, and a handful of Xerian prisoners with neural stabilizers still crackling at their temples. Lieutenant Commander Farron Kerr, freshly returned from the boarding pods, entered the captain's ready room. Her normally confident stride was cautious, an echo of battlescape flashbacks. "We lost half the team on Vashner's plasma corridor," she reported, voice clipped. "Autonomous defense drones adapted to the field's decay faster than we predicted. We'll need updated countermeasures before any further boarding action." Andover glanced up from the holomap, noted, "I want engineers from Malik's team to work with R&D on a pulse emitter that can disable drones specifically. But our main priority is intelligence. Those data banks we recovered, they must be decrypted." Dr. Malik materialized, holographic eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I've already begun triaging the neural logs. Their encrypted saptic codex is unlike any Xenocipher I've seen. It'll take hours to brute force even one quadrant, and we don't have ours." Andover said, "Routhen's repair fleets will be operational within the next standard watch. We get one more shot at crippling their command structure before they regenerate." Farah's gaze flicked to the viewport, where distant Xerian cruisers drifted into repair glyphs. "They're huddling around salvage packs, weapons, engine modules from Vashner. They'll jury-rig new frigates within cycles." A tense silence fell on both sides, fleets poised like wounded beasts. 3. The rift ambushed Resolute slid into the nebula of tranquility, its graviton shields rippling as charged particles buffeted the hull. This was the predetermined rendezvous point for a follow-up strike, a narrow trench carved by asteroid impacts, the perfect place to snare the Xerian repair flotillas. "Deploy sensor buoys," Captain Andover ordered. "I want a 3-dimensional grid of detection points. If even one enemy ship flinches from formation, we'll know." Garcia confirmed, "Buoys away. Grid established. We're reading 8 unidentified contacts at vector 100 to point 3. Andover frowned. "There should have been only 6 repair corvettes escorting salvage vessels. 2 more suggested either reinforcements or saboteurs. Lock weapons on vector 100 to point 3. Range 40,000 clicks." On the tactical display, a tracery of beams lanced out, tracing arcs of energy as graviton torpedoes locked onto targets. Moments later, the tracers illuminated the mist, a pair of sleek, modified frigates sliding into formation at the outer edge of the flotilla. Their hulls bore human markings, Terran Alliance insignias, but their lines were thinner, more angular than anything in the Resolute's database. Lieutenant Zhao's voice cracked over Andover's earpiece. "Captain, those aren't our frigates. Those ships aren't in any registry. They look like us, but twisted." Andover's heart thudded. "Ghost ships," she whispered. "Copies of our own design-phased armor, predictive targeting arrays." Where did they come from? Before she could relay orders, the sensor buoys screamed, A tremor in the subspace field, an incoming hyperspace signature. Multiple objects. Shiri reported from the Ichthyreme's uplink. Dozens of pods approaching. The nebula. Speed beyond FTL norms. The repair flotilla froze. Perhaps the Xerian captains now dreaded the illusion of safety. Perhaps they felt the dissonance between broken ships and these strange doppelgangers. But whatever the reason, their advance halted. And overheld her breath. The ambush was poised, and yet an unseen hand moved the pieces again. For allies in the mist as the phantom frigates drifted closer to the Terran line. Their gravitic profiles shimmered. Far from pure stealth, their phase drives emitted a harmonic brood, an almost musical overtone that seemed to pulse in time. With the Resolute's own systems, Marines lined the deck and ship's sensors flared to life, but no one fired. The nebulous gas dampened calm signals, and everyone felt the tension. Then, from the brig's holograph projector on the Resolute, the image of a Xerian officer, scarred, limping, eyes aflame, floated into view. "I am Captain Mershilov." The Kragedon, his voice reverberated through both fleets. "You struck hard at our pride. Now, you face an uprising within your own ranks." Gasps rippled aboard the Resolute. The Xerian defectors, nearly 80 ships, had turned on their own alliance, claiming that Rauthan's arrogance endangered every world under the Xerian banner. In the haze of battle's aftermath, the seeds of rebellion had sprouted. Captain Mershil continued. "These ships are yours by right of salvage. We offer a truce. Join us in toppling Rauthan's regime, or be forced to contend with a united Xerian insurrection." Silence, and over-exchanged glances with Malak and Farah. Such an alliance was unprecedented, humanity aligning with an alien faction against its own species. Yet the opportunity shimmered like starlight through the mist. If Rauthan fell, the entire Xerian armada could fracture beyond repair. She straightened. "Captain Mershil," she broadcast, voice steady and clear, "we appreciate your courage and foresight. The Terran Confederacy has no desire to subjugate the Xerian people. We accept your offer of alliance on the condition that your forces cease hostilities immediately and allow safe passage for all wounded." A pause. Then Mershil inclined his head. "Agreed. We shift our vector to rendezvous with your command ship. Sever no more blood for this cause." Across the nebula, the phantom frigates flickered and phased, no longer hostile shadows but solemn slashes of solidarity. 5. A new front lineage, the unlikeliest of fleets, coalesced Xerian defectors arrayed alongside Terran dreadnoughts. A single truth emerged. The war had splintered not along species but ideals. In the swirling cosmic haze of the nebula of tranquility, alliances forged in the crucible of desperation promised to redraw the map of power across to civilizations. Captain Andover watched the hull icons shift from red to mottled gold on her tactical holomap. She allowed herself a small smile. They had turned the Xerian armada's own fractures to humanity's advantage. Yet even as repair crews from both sides worked side by side, human engineers teaching Xerian artisans how to stabilize reactive plasma conduits, Andover knew this was merely respite. Rauthan would not tolerate rebellion for long. The next clash would decide whether unity of purpose could outlast the gravitational pull of vengeance. Turning from the viewport, she addressed her bridge. "Maintain station. Begin joint ops drills. And send word to Earth Command, Alliance, with Kragedon defectors secured. Preparing joint strike plans." Below, in the nebula's ghostly glow, the warship that had frozen an alien fleet led the way into a new era of conflict, one where enemies became allies and where every act of mercy could tip the scales of galactic destiny. The nebula of tranquility's phosphorescent tendrils curled around the amassed fleet, like a living tapestry, hiding the new alliance's ships in webs of ion-charged gas. Captain Emira Andover stood on the Resolute's observation deck once more, flanked by Dr. Ria Malik and Commander Luis Garcia. Before them floated a holographic holomap, the fractured Xerian armada to port, the human dreadnought and Kragedon defectors to starboard, all linked by glowing corridors of projected hyperspace lanes and coalition battle lines. Andover's voice was calm but resolute. "Earth Command has confirmed receipt of our status report. They authorize a formal envoy to Admiral Routhen one last chance at negotiation before we press our advantage, but I have doubts he'll come willingly. Malik tapped her datapad. I've finished decrypting the Vashiner's saptic logs. Their psionic chain of command is fractured without Routhen's neural imprimatur. Captains find themselves rudderless. If we take out his flagship, the chain snaps entirely. Garcia folded his arms. That leaves two options: force, a surrender through overwhelming show of force, or assassinate Routhen and let the defectors seize control. Andover closed her eyes, imagining the weight of that decision. To kill an enemy leader in cold blood would shatter the tenuous trust they'd built with Marshall's faction and risk painting humanity as opportunistic conquerors rather than liberators. Yet allowing Routhen to live could reignite a brutal purge. Prepare the envoy, she said at length. I'll accompany Captain Marshall aboard the Kragadan. We'll offer terms: an immediate ceasefire, joint governance of occupied sectors, and the establishment of a neutral council to oversee repairs and prevent further bloodshed. If he refuses, we move to disable his flagship's subspace drives, maroon him in the void where he can't harm any more lives. 1. The diplomatic gambit into the shade of the nebulous swirling mists. The Kragadan and Resolute drew alongside the wounded remains of the Ichtherium. Its hull was pockmarked with plasma burns, its engines cold. A flotilla of defecting Xerian transports hovered nearby, ferrying injured from the Ichtherium to human medical frigates. At precisely 1300 hours, a neutral zone corridor opened. Captain Andover and Captain Marshall entered the Ichtherium's shattered bridge, flanked by armed Marines and Kragadan honor guards. At the dais sat Admiral Routhen, gaunt and still in his violet robes, flanked by two battered captains, one loyalist, one defector, their armor streaked with soot and insignia half erased. Routhen's golden eyes bored into Andover. You trespass upon my flagship, he intoned, voice hoarse. You poison my people with revolution. Andover inclined her head, speaking softly. We are not your enemies, Admiral. Your people are exhausted. You've crippled worlds, razed colonies, driven civilizations to their knees. But when one human warship stood before you, every mind stopped. We don't need to destroy you to win, only to show you another path. Marshall stepped forward, his scarred gauntlet tapping the holotable. Join us, rule by council, where voices of veterans, civilians, even defectors share power. I offer you a position not as emperor, but as representative of the old guard. Guide your people into a new era. A tension crackled in the air as Routhen considered the offer. Memories flickered across his mind's eye. The first conquests, the triumphant return to Xeris Prime, the adulation of those who hailed him as the harbinger of glory. And if I refuse, then we disable your flagship, Andover said. Without your neural relay, your fleet will scatter. She tapped her badge. Tactical teams are primed and waiting. Routhen's gaze turned distant. He saw the boarded over walls of his bridge, the specter of the Vashiner's destruction, the faceless Marines pouring through his corridors. Slowly, he rose to his full height. I will not be exiled, he said, voice low, but neither will I remain a tyrant, too. The shattered Crownby twilight. The neutral zone's haze had parted enough to reveal star beacons blinking erratically overhead. The signals of dozens of Xerian warships reactivating without orders. A delicate dance of raw power and diplomacy ensued. Defectors guided repair teams aboard loyalist vessels, while human engineers patched hull breaches and reconfigured drive cores to prevent sudden salvos. In the grand atrium of the Ichtherium, the Coalition Council assembled. Andover, Marshall, Malik, Garcia, and 3 senior Xerian captains to defectors, and 1 loyalist now resigned to peace. Between them lay holdables projecting the Xerian star charts. 10 star systems marked for joint recovery operations. Dozens of populated worlds hanging in the balance. Routhen took his seat at the head of the table, his shoulders slumped. We have known only conquest, he admitted, but now I see my vision faltered. You offered mercy where I commanded terror. I will stand down my loyalist fleets in the outer void. But in return, I require one concession. Andover leaned forward. Name it. Routhen's gaze met hers. Let no human vessel pass into the core systems of the Alliance without sanction from this council. We will honor our borders, provided you respect ours. A murmur rippled through the assembled captains. Marshall smiled, nodding. I accept. These terms, Andover permitted herself a nod. So do I. 3 embers of tomorrow. Weeks later, in the shadow of repaired battlecruisers and human shuttles, the newly christened truce fleet stood as a testament to an uneasy peace. Captain Andover addressed her crew one last time before departing for Earth Command's flagship. You held the line when all seemed lost, she told them, voice carried across the deck. You showed that mercy can be the strongest weapon. We begin now a new chapter, not just for humanity, but for an entire civilization reborn. Marines and engineers alike cheered. Dr. Malik stepped forward, handing Andover a small data sphere. The final cipher of Xeris Prime's archives, she explained. They want to share their history, teach us their science. Andover uncapped the sphere and held it up as the first flare of a rising sun streaked through the viewport. She turned to gaze at the distant glow of Xeris Prime, a world once shattered by war, now on the brink of renaissance. In the distance, a lone Xerian battlecruiser slipped its moorings and approached. Its captain saluted Andover as it passed. She returned the salute, knowing it was more than courtesy. It was the sign of two peoples looking past centuries of enmity toward shared horizons. As the Resolute departed the nebulous threshold, its graviton engines humming with renewed purpose, Captain Andover allowed herself a hopeful smile. The wars of conquest were over. Ahead lay a covenant of cooperation, a new frontier of discovery, and above all, the fragile promise that a single human warship's gambit could redefine the destiny of two civilizations. And somewhere among the stars, Admiral Routhen looked on, his crown of conquest shattered, and in its place, the weight of leadership reborn.